When the internet began, bulletin board services, or BBS, became the first online communities of the so-called information superhighway. Using their phone lines, people logged in from all over America to talk about sports, games, movies, and on one BBS in particular, share their ghost stories. Over time, those communities all went dark, except for one lone server that continues to operate somewhere in an unknown part of Pennsylvania's Rust Belt. A relic of the 1990s, veiled in mystery, it is a digital archive of humanity's strangest encounters with the unknown, as told by the people who experienced them. My name is Brandon Schexnayder, and you are listening to Fear Daily.
Subject: The Amulet. User: Varsity BSC 12. Posted August 9th, 1997.
When it comes to ghost stories around San Diego County, everyone knows all about the obvious tourist spots. William Heath Davis House, Loma Lighthouse, Whaley House, places like that. Chula Vista, though, we fly under the radar in a lot of ways. Not only do we have more ghosts, but living is cheaper and you can get out into nature in a couple of minutes. Even now, with all this development happening, you can get from east of the 805 into Otay in maybe 15 minutes, which is nothing. So, the ghost thing. My family has always been pretty in touch with their spiritual sides, but I never actually experienced anything firsthand until I was in high school. Bonita Vista High School opened in '66 and isn't known for much aside from being the high school that Matt from Soundgarden went to. Matt and I were actually friends early on, but he was always a music guy, and as I got older, I became more of a sports guy, so we eventually went our separate ways. He's a good dude, though, and I'm proud of him for taking it as far as he has and living the dream. Much respect. Being a sports guy, I spent a lot of time in the gym and locker room, and it turns out that place is haunted as hell. The guys would talk about the showers turning themselves on and off, and the moment I went in there for the first time, I knew they weren't joking. My grandmother taught me that you feel spirits in your chest, like something is pressing down on you slightly. That locker room didn't just press lightly on your chest, it sat on it like an 800-pound gorilla. It wasn't just the showers either. Sometimes after a game, even if we won, the mood in the locker room was pitch black. The pressure was much worse on those days, and when I described it to my grandmother, she said that was the work of something dark trying to feed on us. She said that evil spirits fed on vitality and joy, leaving those they fed on feeling hollow and cold. It was a dead-on description of what we felt in that locker room, and she said the best I could do was protect myself. For that, she gave me a thin chain with a small mirrored pendant, basically a broken-off piece of mirror with the edges sanded down and covered with lacquer so they wouldn't cut me. She said to wear it under my clothes and it would ward off the evil in the locker room as well as anything else I might run into out there. No surprise, she was right. After the game, everyone was pissed right off even though we'd won. Everyone except for me, that is. I felt the energy in the room, but grandmother's mirror was keeping it from doing any real harm. I would still feel the cold spots in the bleachers, but none of it lingered with me. It's been a long time since those days, and grandmother is gone now, but I still wear the amulet. Girlfriends have teased me about it, teammates have teased me about it, but I'll be wearing this thing until the day God finally takes me. I like to tell people it's about sentimentality because the circles I run in doesn't leave a lot of room for spirit, but it's still keeping me safe years later. Recently, in fact, I finally met the Bonita Road hitchhiker, and I truly believe my grandmother's magic is what kept me safe. The story of the hitchhiker is hard to pin down, but some people say it's the ghost of an elderly man who died somewhere around Bonita Road. Whoever or whatever it is, they will appear in your back seat at random when you drive the road at night. Most of the time, it's benign, but there are variations of the story where the hitchhiker tries to intimidate you into checking the back seat at a critical moment when to do so would cause you to wreck your car. You can argue about how true that part of it is, but there do seem to be a higher than usual number of wrecks along that stretch of road. When I had my encounter, I was coming back from my girlfriend Rita's house, west of the 805 and just past Donnie's Cafe when I felt the pressure in my chest. It didn't surprise me exactly because I'd felt heaviness along that road my whole life, but the intensity of it was unexpected. If most people who encounter the hitchhiker get Bellabog, I had gotten Chernabog, and he was not happy to have been disturbed. The crushing sensation in my chest was intense, and I took one of my hands off the wheel to wrap around my grandmother's amulet. I envisioned a white, spectral shield between me and the back seat the way she taught me and pushed down harder on the gas. Despite all my protection, the pull to look in the back was so strong, but I knew I had to resist. To look in the back was to give in to it and to open yourself up to crashing. Dark spirits want you to think they're all powerful, that their winning is an inevitability, but it's all a smokescreen. We are alive, they are not, and that makes us more powerful by default. I tensed my neck and kept looking forward, knowing that I only had to hold on until Otay Lakes Road. For some reason, the hitchhiker has no power beyond that point. The breath on my neck intensified, the spirit daring me to look upon it. I held my breath and pushed down harder on the gas. The lights of the Arco were my goalpost, and I refused to be taken down before I hit it. The second I passed it, it was like a wave had crashed over my car and flattened everything. The presence was gone, and I was exhausted. Chalk another win up for my grandmother.
Subject, a desert honeymoon. User, 18 Lil Luck. Posted, February 3rd, 1996.
My wife Margie and I eloped in 1972 when we were 19. Just tossed some bags into my El Camino and headed to Las Vegas. It was what you might call an act of defiance. I loved her, but my parents were intent on me going to college, and for some reason they saw my relationship with Margie as incompatible with that. Truth of the matter is, I did eventually go to college and never would have made it through without her. Heck, I wouldn't have made it through the last 25 years at all without her, and that is a fact. Back then, you couldn't get married on the Strip in Vegas, so we went downtown to a place called the Little Flower Chapel or something like that, next door to the Howard Johnson. We more or less stayed in the hotel for 3 days, the details of which I'll spare you before hopping back into the car to slowly make our way home. When you're young, you feel like you've got nothing but time, so we wound our way back east slowly, cutting through Arizona and then up toward Monument Valley, which was a special request from me. See, as a kid, I was really into Westerns and had always wanted to see the Buttes in person. I had no earthly way of knowing what we were going to run into down there, and that I wasn't ever going to see Mountain Valley in the light of day, but that's how it worked out. The Arizona leg of the trip was to visit Margie's sister Robin in Flagstaff, except Robin didn't know we were coming and had a terrible summer cold when we arrived. She wasn't in any shape to have company, and we didn't want to run the risk of getting sick on her honeymoon, so we said our goodbyes and kept moving. It was late afternoon, and the shadows were getting long, but we decided to push on, since Monument Valley was only 3 hours away. Margie was on map duty, and she informed me that the closest town to our destination was a little spot on Highway 160 called Kayenta. I don't remember what time it was when we saw the markers counting down the miles to Kayenta, but it was late enough that darkness was gathering at the base of the mountains. There was no way we were going to see anything worthwhile in Monument Valley if we arrived this late, so we opted for a motel instead, the Whittlemeyer or something like that. It wasn't the Ritz or even the Howard Johnson, but it was cheap and clean enough we felt comfortable getting right back to those things newlyweds do. Everything was fine until just after midnight. We'd tired each other out and were dozing on top of the covers when we woke up to what sounded like dogs howling in the distance. That, in and of itself, isn't out of the ordinary, but for some reason, the sound set my teeth on edge. It seemed like a good time to draw a line under the night, so we got under the covers and turned out the light. Margie asked me to put my arm around her, and I was happy to oblige. I could feel myself melting back into sleep when the howling came back. This time, right outside our motel room door. From the way Margie stiffened up in my arms, I knew she must have woken up as well. As we lay there listening, we heard what sounded like shuffling footsteps just outside our door. We weren't the only guests in the motel, but these dogs seemed to have fixated on us. These shuffling footsteps crossed back and forth in front of our room for maybe 10 minutes. Then came a knock at the door, 3 short, hard raps. I went to get up and see what was going on, but Margie clung to me, whispering, "Don't go," in my ear. The rapping came again, followed by the manager's voice calling out, saying there was a problem with my credit card and that I needed to let him in to resolve it. I again started to pull back the covers so I could get rid of this guy, but Margie held even tighter. This time she whispered, "We paid cash for the room, remember?" I thought about it for a moment and, she was right. We'd never so much as shown the clerk a credit card, never mind paying with one. You could do that back then. The knocking intensified and the manager's voice continued to call me. We didn't know what to do. The closest phone was in the office, and to get there, we'd have to get past whoever was on the other side of the door. I didn't yet understand we were dealing with a what rather than a who. Finally, I drew myself up, put on my shorts, and walked to the door where I said something like, "You got the wrong room. We didn't pay with a credit card." The shuffling steps stopped. When the voice spoke again, I had the uncanny impression that the speaker was smiling. "Mr. Robinson," it said in the casual voice of a school teacher gently correcting a student for getting an answer wrong in front of the class. "Of course you did. I have the impression right here. Please let me in and we can resolve this without involving the police." I looked back at Margie, who frantically shook her head. Her fear was starting to get to me, and I had to take a breath to steady myself. "No," I said, "I think you better just call the police." There was a sudden hammering on the door so hard I was shocked it didn't splinter. Margie screamed, and for a moment, there was silence. A moment later, a different voice called out from the other side of the door, "Margie? Margie, is that you? Are you in there?" She blanched and drew the covers up around her. "Who is that?" I whispered. She spoke so softly, I was barely able to hear her. "It's my father." Margie's father had died in a car accident when she was 12. He was a cruel man with a drinking problem and plowed the family car into a tree with Margie and her sister inside. Margie was badly lacerated, leaving her with lifelong scarring along her forearms, while her sister, who was sitting up front, was killed on impact. Her father survived on life support for 2 more days until finally succumbing to his injuries, and yet here he apparently was, calling to us from the other side of a thin motel door 1,000 miles away from home. My guts turned to ice. The voice took on a commanding tone. "Margie Hawthorne, let me in there right now." When I turned toward her, I expected to find Margie weeping, but instead she was getting out of bed. Even under the circumstances and the darkness of that dingy motel room, she looked like a goddess. She still does. Margie called out to the voice that claimed to be her father. "Daddy, is that really you?" "Yes, baby, it's been so long. Please let Daddy in so I can see my little girl." "Daddy, if it's really you, can you tell me your middle name?" Silence. "Daddy, just tell me your middle name so I know it's you." Nothing. "You don't know his middle name because I don't know it. Isn't that right, you son of a bitch?" The howl that came from the other side of the door was unlike anything I'd ever heard. It was a sound of pure, inhuman rage, and it hit us like a physical force. We dropped to our knees, our hands clapped to our ears. It could have gone on for seconds or hours. I genuinely have no idea, but when it ended, we collapsed against each other, our backs to the door, and stayed there till the sun rose. As soon as it did, we grabbed our clothes, hopped in the car, and drove like hell out of town. 2 hours later in Cortez, Colorado, I pulled over so we could get dressed. I said to Margie, "How did you know what to say?" She finished pulling her t-shirt over her head, then stood there for a minute. Just when I thought she wasn't going to answer, she said, "My dad never talked to me like that. I was never his little girl or his baby." Hearing his voice was shocking, but once I stopped being shocked, I realized something. He wasn't talking to me the way he had, but the way I'd wished he had. Whatever was out there was somehow pulling it from my mind. That's all I could think, and so I came up with an experiment to try and prove it. I guess it worked. She opened up the passenger side door and got in. The early morning sun was shining, and somewhere nearby a scrub jay was calling. Whatever had happened the night before, I knew one thing for sure. Marrying Margie was the smartest thing I'd ever done, and that's still true all these years later.
Fear Daily is an independent podcast hosted by Brandon Schexnayder and written by Brennan Storr, with Joanna Smith serving as the consulting editor, audio production by Rachel Boyd, and sound design by Southern Gothic Media. This podcast is a work of fiction. Names, characters, places, and incidents are either products of the author's imagination or are used fictitiously. Any resemblance to actual persons, living or dead, or to real events or locations, is entirely coincidental. Ad-free versions of Fear Daily are available now on your favorite podcast apps. For more information, visit feardaily.com. But move fast, before the server goes offline.